It's 5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock. So could everyone please mute their mics and we'll start the meeting. Okay, welcome to this meeting of Children's Services and Education. My name is Councillor Rajbir Singh and I'm the chair of this meeting. In accordance with the 2020 coronavirus regulations, this meeting is being held virtually to facilitate attendance and to enable the consideration of important matters during the COVID-19 situation. This meeting will therefore operate differently, with members of board joining us remotely to contribute and vote on any matters. I would ask all attendees to mute their microphones unless they have been invited to speak. Please also contact James Sandy if you experience a technical issue during the meeting. Depending on the device you are using to log in with, please use the hand up icon in the control bar or type a question mark if you wish to speak during the meeting. I will then indicate when you can speak. When you are finished, please remember to mute your microphone. Following questions and a debate, and in order to make a decision on an item, I will ask members whether they are for or against a proposal or if they wish to abstain. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed online and members of the public and the press are allowed by law to film, audio record, take photographs, blog or tweet during this meeting. Firstly, I would request Deb to do a roll call for all the members present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Singh.
Councillor Rajbir Singh, Chair of Children's Services and Scrutiny Board.
Councillor Priest.
I'm Liam Priest. I'm the councillor for Charlotte with Grovale Ward and I'm also the vice chair of this board.
Councillor Ashman.
Lorraine Ashburn, I'm councillor for Tillydale Ward and also a member of the committee.
Councillor Carmichael.
Yeah, councillor for Blackie, thank you.
Councillor Chidley.
Hello, yes, I'm Councillor Jenny Chidley and my ward is Prince's End in Tipton. Thank you, and on this committee.
Councillor Costigan.
Councillor Elaine Costigan, Wednesbury North councillor, and I'm a member of the committee.
Councillor Hussain.
Tahir Hussain, councillor for the Sovereign Victoria Ward and a member of this committee.
Councillor McVitie.
Councillor Richard McVitie, councillor for Newton and a member of this board.
Councillor Miller.
Hi, I'm Kay Miller. I'm the councillor for Heatley Heath and I sit on this committee. Thank you.
Councillor Phillips.
Hi, I'm Councillor Phillips, Charlie with Grovale, and I sit on this committee.
Councillor Shackleton.
Councillor Anne Shackleton, councillor for Craigley Heath and Dowes Hill.
Co-operative member Charlotte Ward-Lewis.
Charlotte Ward-Lewis, Deputy Director of Education for the Church of England Birmingham, co-opted member.
And apologies from co-opted member Tahira Majid, Chair.
Brilliant. Any more apologies? Just one apology you got. That's noted. Okay, let's move on to the agenda. Minutes. Okay, the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th January 2020 are presented. Are they approved?
Yes, Chair, I'll move those as approved.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll take this as approval from all the members. Okay, members to declare any interest in matters to be discussed at the meeting. Does any member have an interest to declare? Okay, good pause. I'll take that as a no. Agenda item number 4 is Chair's announcement. I do have an announcement to make. Following on from the agenda discussion meeting held on the Monday, the 15th June, members agreed that there was a need to consider the style of meetings and indicated a preference for more single item agenda meetings. Members also welcomed the working group method of the scrutiny, which allowed in-depth discussion and focus on an issue. It was agreed that the scrutiny team will pursue the request for an additional scrutiny meeting to be arranged in July to consider Sandwell Children's Trust annual performance during 2019 and 2020, and a request from the cabinet member for best start in life to look at homeschooling arrangements in Sandwell. Can I seek members' approval for the above proposal, please?
I'm happy with that, Chair.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, that's really good.
Happy with that.
Fantastic. So I'll take that as approved. The next agenda item, number 5 and 6, I'll give a brief introduction to Chris Ward, the Director of Education, Leslie Hager, Executive Director, Children's Services. We welcome you both. I would start with acknowledgement for the hard work and dedication our directors and their teams have manifested during this time of crisis. I accept how challenging it must have been to work along confused, contradictory and changing guidelines from the central government. From my conversations with Chris and Leslie, I know they have been receiving information from DFE at around 9-10 p.m. every night and then interpreting it and sending it to the schools the next morning. It must have been arduous to find a local way through the national guidance to reach a consensus. So I welcome Chris Ward and Leslie Hager to the board and appreciate their time. I would also like to welcome Ms. Peno, who has joined us. She is the head teacher at Crockett's Community Primary School and is here to share her experience of how she managed her role during the pandemic. Chris and Leslie will be presenting a joint report regarding overview of COVID-19 effect on children's services and education in Sandwell and phased opening of our primary and secondary schools. This report will cover agenda items 5 and 6. Over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant. So I think we've just got 4 slides that we're going to share. Is Suki sharing the slides for us, or do you want me to share them?
You can share it if you got it on your screen.
Okay. Bear with me. Okay, can you see those?
Yes, I can see it, and I believe everybody else can see it as well.
Yes.
Okay, that should be better. Okay. So the first slide is just giving a general overview to everyone about some of the things that have been happening across the children's services space. So first of all, within the council, we've had a daily sit-rep meeting, and at that meeting, all of the directors are there with the chief executive, and we've made sure that Sandwell Children's Trust has had an invitation to that meeting as well. And we've also been joined by the police commander, borough commander, and also CCG representative, Michelle Carolyn, and they've been able to attend occasionally. The reason I start with this is that one of the things we found is that good communication and timely information has been one of the key learning points for us through this whole period of sort of 13, 14 weeks, however long it is now, and something that all partners are saying has been really vital to us being able to manage well during this period of time. It's been very important for the Children's Trust to be able to attend those daily meetings as well, because, you know, ultimately they are a company owned by the council, and they've been able to mirror some of the activities we've taken around risk assessment, PPE, etc. Secondly, with our partners, so Chris will talk a bit more later on about the daily communication with schools that you've just mentioned, Chair. But additionally, we've had a weekly meeting of the safeguarding partners, and these have been incredibly well attended by all of our partners, from paediatricians through to accident and emergency, the CCG, the Mental Health Foundation Trust providers, our police colleagues, voluntary sector, education has been represented, and obviously the Trust and other council services. So all of the partners have met every week. I've chaired the meeting. All of the partners have provided business continuity plans, and each week we've shared those plans with each other so that we can look at where one agency's plan might change. Does it impact another agency? And the idea was that you know, we didn't want the rush around this pandemic to mean that any changes in individual agency circumstances might mean that something might fall through the gap. So we've been able to keep a close eye on that every week. And also through those meetings, we've undertaken a number of joint tasks. So some campaigns. In the early stages, we had a couple of incidents of children falling out of windows. So we ran a campaign around home safety, you know, general hints and tips for families, but particularly in that hot weather, things about, you know, keeping windows with window locks. We provided window locks. We had other campaigns around online safety for children and parents, and a campaign to encourage families to still visit a GP if their children needed vaccinations, still visit A&E if their children needed emergency attention. And then the final thing we've been looking at through those weekly meetings is any surge planning. So we've managed very well across the partnership over this period of time, but we also know that the reduction in, for example, children attending GP surgeries, the reduction in contacts being made to the social care front door, we know that as children start to go back to school, these referrals will increase, and we know that there will be a surge in our services. So we've been looking at that through the partnership as well, and creating a joint plan so that we can be ready to respond. We've had several times a week we meet with the DFE. I think at first Chris and I were meeting with the DFE every day. It's a couple of times a week now, although there are 3 meetings this week. And we also have a weekly meeting with the DFE and Ofsted. And this is the way in which the regulators have been able to still keep in contact with all of the things that we're doing at a local level. Keep an eye on what we're doing, really, make sure that we're doing things well, and that we're being accountable to them, even at times when we can't be inspected. We've also had a member of the regional Ofsted team working alongside us in our vulnerable children's group, and I'll come to that in a moment. We've made sure that we've continued to link with the regional West Midlands work, again sharing our practice, thinking about challenges where one local authority might have already thought of a solution. They've shared it with everyone else so that we're not all trying to reinvent the wheel, and that's been very helpful. And similarly with national work. And we've also been trying to make sure that we don't forget to listen to the voices of children, young people and their families during this time. Chris and I have had some meetings with the SHAPE group, had some meetings with families online, and we've had some meetings with children in care and our care leavers online. And listening to what those young people are saying about their experience, again, is really going to help our planning moving forward. We've had what started off as a daily meeting of our vulnerable children's group. So we pulled this group together. It's a partnership meeting again. And on a daily basis, we've been making sure that someone is in contact with every vulnerable child in Sandwell. So through that daily meeting, looking at who is best placed to make contact, and who will then follow up that contact with the family. That's been particularly important. Our vulnerable children's group has been a really broad group. There are more than 700 shielded children in that group, for example. All of our children in care, child protection children in need are in that group, our children with education, health and care plans, other children that we might be concerned about who are known in an early help space, but also head teachers have been flagging up children that they are particularly concerned about, and we've been making sure that those children get response as well. We've continued our detached youth work during this period. So in every park in Sandwell, we've had detached youth work teams daily in the parks, talking to young people that are there. We've made lots of new contacts with new groups of young people actually through that work, and I think we'll continue some of this as we move forward. I've mentioned the surge planning already, but also all of that work has helped our strategic commissioning. So whilst our contacts to the children's front door, social care front door, have been much reduced, we also know that some of the demands in that space have increased for mental health support, domestic abuse support, and some other services. So we're looking at those through our strategic commissioning. This slide has been provided by Sandwell Children's Trust, just to again provide some assurance for the Scrutiny board. Starting with leadership and governance at the top of the circle there, I've had a daily meeting in the morning with Francis Craven, the Chief Executive of the Trust. Again, at the beginning of this period of time, we probably had 3 or 4 meetings every day, just so that we could make sure that everything that needed to be in place to safeguard children in that space was in place, and that the interface with everything in the council and other partners was working well. Moving just around the circle, changes to core practice. The DFE did offer some flexibilities in the children's social care space. We haven't had to use any of those flexibilities so far, and so the core practice hasn't needed to change. However, there have been some things that have been done differently, but the remote working and the contact with the children, interestingly, has shown us how we could innovate some of that work. Children have been much more interested in talking about and getting involved with their own care plan reviews on a virtual platform than they have in person, and this is really, really interesting in terms of the work moving forward. Obviously, impact on future inspection outcomes. We had hoped that our next full inspection of children's services would have taken place this month in June, but obviously all inspections are on hold. It's unlikely now that our next full inspection will be until next year. Clearly
the slide needs to be moved on. I think we're still on previous slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, hang on. So you haven't got the next slide. You can't see that.
No, I think none of the members can see.
I'm sorry.
We're still on the first slides.
Leslie, would it be helpful for me to share it from my screen?
That would be great. Thank you, James. Not sure why it's not doing it. Thank you.
Right.
I'm on the second slide. Thank you, James. Okay, I'll carry on talking while James is doing that, if that's okay.
Yes, sure.
I know you want to talk more than have a presentation.
Absolutely.
So yes, inspection outcomes. I mean, I think we're very disappointed because, you know, we were all hoping that this summer would be the summer where children's services in Sandwell are no longer inadequate, you know, for the first time for 12 years. But we'll have to wait until next year. I imagine what will happen, having had a conversation with Ofsted, is that we'll have a monitoring visit or 2 in the autumn, and then in the spring we'll have our full inspection. I've already mentioned the working relationships with partners, and that's worked very well. But moving again onto the pink circle, because we haven't seen children face to face as much, even though they have engaged, as I say, virtually, we've increased the management oversight and the quality assurance of those cases to make sure that we can really have assurance that children are being protected. And then the reset and recovery planning is in place now in the trust, just as it is in the rest of the council. So we're joining those things together. Next slide, please, James. So I'm moving on to Chris now to talk about schools.
Okay, if you just bear with me, I will try and get the right slide. It's just being mischievous at the moment, so just bear with me a moment.
A good word. We can start talking about schools while we're waiting, I think. Are you there, Chris?
Yes. Yeah, I'm here as long as you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Chris.
Great. What I'll do is I'll talk to this slide and the one that will follow it, and then hand over to Lynn so she can talk from her personal experience as being a head teacher. What we have in education is probably an awful lot of work for schools, which constantly changes on a day-to-day basis as guidance changes. And just to put it in perspective, across children's services, we're up to 170 plus pieces of guidance that come out from the government for us all to try and assimilate and work with. And of course, every single day, some more updates come, and we're expecting a raft more following the announcements at the weekend. So during this period, it's been an interesting time. In terms of early year and childcare arrangements, we've got up to 100 settings that operate across the borough. Of those settings, once the pandemic started and lockdown occurred, about 75 of them closed because there weren't enough young people coming through the doors. So there was quite a change in terms of demand, and because a lot of those places and settings require parents to pay for places, it meant they had to furlough a lot of the staff. So for the first 2.5 months of the period we've just had, we had a number of settings that were waiting to reopen as parents' confidence and social distancing rules changed. Since June the 1st, we've started to see them opening again as more people are being requested to go back to work and parents need more childcare. We're not at full capacity by any means at this stage, though. Schools throughout the whole of this period have of course been open to vulnerable children and key worker children. It's often quoted that schools are reopening, they never closed. So we know that the uptake of places was quite small in Sandwell. It was about 2% of the population were taking up spaces in school, which meant once we got to a point where we could get to wider opening of schools, we were able to offer more places across those schools. Now, the key for schools during this time is they had to balance two things. One is the vulnerable children in the school and the critical worker children in the school, as well as being able to support pupils who are not in school during that time. This meant schools moved to a lot of work packs or online learning or connecting through different routes so that parents would have access to information to support children's learning at home, or to at least get children doing some activities at home, which was really quite important to make sure children still felt connected to their schools. And this continued up until half term, when we had the wider opening of schools. Now, prior to that, we'd had to do some decision making as a group of head teachers and local authority, and that was where the joint executive group of heads came in, who've been very good and very keen to make some decisions that we can use across the whole of our schools and academies. And the wider opening information was included in the pack, which demonstrated how they would go through focusing on reception class, year 1 class and year 6. We also wrote out to parents at that time to tell them what was exactly happening across the borough. That letter came from me, and then schools wrote out individually as well to explain how it's going to be interpreted in schools. Now, the key issues for schools is they had to do massive sets of risk assessments around the decisions they were making in schools to make sure that those children and staff would remain safe and within government guidance at the same time. And things like personal protective equipment was something that was key in a lot of our discussions with unions as well as staff during that time. The local authority provided a small starter box of PPE for all schools to make sure they had something, and then schools are carrying on getting their own through their normal routes after that. But there was a lot of change that was going on in the arrangements for schools, how they managed it logistically in terms of classes and space, in terms of the bubbles of children that they used, and how they spaced children out. And we know the government guidance was up to 15 children in a bubble, but realistically, when you're doing social distancing, you can only get 6 to 10 in a classroom, even with a large sized classroom to do that. So the council continue to support the decisions schools are making on that, because they are the best people who can make decisions about the space they have. We're also supporting children to learn and play at home and have provided IT equipment through the government's laptop scheme. We've got 1,586 laptops going to vulnerable children across the borough. We're halfway through delivering those at the moment. We expect the rest to be delivered in the next 2 weeks. And also there's IT for year 10 pupils who are disadvantaged. Those should be arriving by the end of the month. So we're trying as much as we can to support those children as well. In terms of examinations and assessments, you'll know that the examination season was cancelled this year, and the government are putting in for GCSEs and A-levels the ability to take them in the autumn if those children would like to have another go at the grades they get. So what will happen in this year is that children will be ranked in their schools based on their coursework up to the period they've had so far, plus what their estimated grades were going to be, and those are the grades they will be given. So if they're not the grades that the youngsters were hoping for or were working towards, then they'll have another opportunity in the autumn to gain those grades. From our point of view, all of our services in the Council for Education have been adapting to try and work online, talking to young people online where necessary, communicating with schools, and part of that has been the daily letter that we're trying to make sure our head teachers get. It can be a very difficult job being a head teacher with everything coming in, so we've been trying to make sense of it for them, all the information that's coming in, and trying to find out what their key issues are so that we can help resolve them on a daily basis. Our key assumptions are going to be at the end of this period when young people go back into school full time, that we might see an increase in the elective home education. So the focus of Scrutiny coming up in a few months' time on EHE is good. It's quite timely, but we're also going to see, with young pupils being out of school for 4 to 5 months before they come back, levels of anxiety increasing, school refusals and additional support required for those children. And clearly everyone's concerned about the attainment gap widening, so that's key for us to see how we can support schools to bring the attainment gap back. If I go on to the final slide, this is some of the data so that you understand what's happening at the moment. All the primary schools are currently open now for additional classes for reception year 1 and year 6. And we know that there's an uptake of places in most schools that's still quite low from parents. Now that varies from school to school and also varies from class to class as well. Now, not every school is able to offer all 3 year groups because they're still dealing with vulnerable children and critical workers. So we've only got 23 of our 95 primary schools open to all 3 year groups, 52 are open to 2 or more, and the rest are open to 1 or the vulnerable children and critical worker children. So on a daily basis, you'll have about 2,000 plus primary pupils in each school each day. Sorry, in the schools each day, and you can see from underneath that on the slide, 14% of reception attending, 11.3 of year 1 and 15.3 of year 6. Now that changes up and down on a daily basis depending on what rota schools are using to bring children in, and so across the course of time, those children who wish to come into school will be able to access a place in the majority of cases. There are 1 or 2 individual cases we have to work through with the parents. In secondary schools, they didn't welcome back additional year groups until last Monday, and year 10 and year 12 were welcomed in. Now with secondaries, they felt there was less issue in terms of space because there was a lower request from the government in terms of how many children they bring back in, and only 25% of the cohort is allowed on the site at any time. So across all of our secondary schools, which is mainly academies, as you know, that's 500 plus year 10 pupils coming in, and 12% of the cohort on any one day. With year 12, because it's 6th formers, that's a smaller cohort, so there's 16% of attendance at any one time coming in. So what schools are saying is that of the places in secondary that have offered, about 60% of parents are taking those up in year 10 and year 12, but obviously they're staggered over a whole week, so it spreads things out for us. So you can see what I put on the blue strip at the bottom. The overall attendance prior to the 1st of June was about 1,100, which is critical workers and vulnerable children. And now with the wider opening, it's up to 4,300. And that is rising daily as parents have more requests to go back to work, as more parents are designated as critical workers, or as parents start to feel more secure about sending their children to school because they start to feel it's more safe based on the information they're getting on a daily basis from government. So I'm going to stop there and just hand over to Lynn, if she'd like to talk through how it felt from her perspective.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. You've covered everything. So yeah, as a head teacher then, I think for me, I've gone through several phases. If I go back to sort of beginning of lockdown and how it's worked, the first couple of weeks, it's all about denial, isn't it? It's like everything. This will be fine. It's all going to go away. So we had teachers who were at home rewriting curriculum plans and updating policies and all the sort of paperworky side that we have to do in schools. We were like, oh, great, we've got all this time. We can use this really wisely. Then sort of after a couple of weeks, I think pastorally, it's really struck me that things needed to change and something needed to happen, because by this point, we do weekly calls to our children. And by this point, I was getting emails from staff. I haven't been able to get hold of so-and-so. I haven't spoke to so-and-so. So at that point, we kind of went, OK, we need to do something. There was the difficulty we had around the Eden Red vouchers. Do you remember that, Chris? That was a fun time. So there was huge problems with this voucher scheme when that came out. And that created an awful lot of problem in terms of parents' expectations. They were going to get these vouchers. They thought schools were holding them and not sharing them, and that we'd done something wrong. And so I had a lot of parents kind of really cross because they weren't getting their money. So we started doing our own food bank effectively from school, and started doing home visits at that point and delivering food parcels. And then when the vouchers did start coming through, we were able to print those off and put those into the packages and give those out. So parents were getting, so if we couldn't get hold of them on the phone, we were knocking on the doors and delivering food and homework packs. And just seeing the children. So I mean, I have had teachers actually sitting outside delivering lessons to children who've gone, I don't know how to do my homework, and the parents like, help me. So they've kind of gone through the work with them. So that's been really positive, and actually the staff have loved doing that, and really, because you know, we like seeing people, don't we? So to see our kids has been really powerful. And then we sort of moved into the whole how are we going to reopen. So we had a sort of period of calm, if you like, where we were ticking along and everything was going well, and we were going out to the homes and plenty of home learning getting organised. And then so the next thing that came was obviously the announcement that we had to be open, and we knew we were going to be opening, but I think we'd all, because we talked about this at JEG, that it was going to be based on our own schools. We might offer it to family groups to reduce the risk of spread. And so we'd say, right, well, there's no point having it one child, we might as well have the whole family, then the parent can go back to work. And that was kind of how a lot of heads were thinking, because we were very much like, this feels like we need to do this. It's the right thing for childcare, for vulnerable families, for all those things. And then we got the announcement that it was reception year 1 and year 6, and then we got the announcement it was nursery as well. So I haven't been able to open nursery again for, well, it's not a statutory year group. So I think as a group of heads at JEG, we kind of went, that's not our priority. Let's get reception year 1 and year 6 in. And that was hard because it was about getting staff back on board and getting staff back into school. So we'd had lots of staff on a rota coming in to work with the key workers and the vulnerable children. Now, the staff who'd been in school loved it, and they were happy. They were relaxed about coming back into school. They saw that the children got a lot from it, and I think they just enjoyed having that sort of human contact. It was trying to get those other staff who hadn't been back in school back in, who struggled. We did an awful lot of staff wellbeing things to try, and so from about Easter, I suddenly clicked. I was like, I haven't done a staff meeting for 3 weeks. This isn't right. So we started doing this sort of Zoom type meetings and Teams meetings with the staff. And the first time I put a sort of Zoom, it was a Zoom meeting we did back then, so I could see everybody's faces. And there was teachers who started crying when they could see everybody again, and I was, oh, I didn't expect it to be emotional. And there was a period of, okay, let's just, but then you realise there'd been some people who some of my staff are shielding very, very strictly, and they'd literally only seen their family and the, you know, the Asda delivery man. So for them to then see familiar faces, it was, so that was another thing that I thought, oh, I've got to really work on the mental well-being of my staff as well. This isn't just about the children and families. I need to have a staff that are going to come back to work eventually at some point. So we've sort of started doing lots of things to get the staff, you know, upbeat, and even one of my staff was doing the Couch to 5K, so she had this idea that a few of us would do a 5K run and on a Friday and take in some of the roads around school to get the children. So I said, well, let's do it in fancy dress. So we all went out in fancy dress as superheroes and knocked on, well, not knocked, but, you know, screamed down the streets and got all the kids out and woke them up, half of them. I mean, this was like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, but, you know, they were all asleep still. So, and that went down really, really well. So the staff and some of the staff have carried on doing it. They've enjoyed it. They don't dress up anymore, but they go for a 5K run. So it's kind of celebrating what staff have achieved as well, because we're talking a lot about what children have achieved, but, you know, as a head teacher, I have to look after the well-being of my staff as well, and sometimes they get forgotten, don't they? So it was making sure they get brought in as well. We have a Friday night Zoom quiz now, and various things that we would do anyway as a social group of people. We're kind of working extra hard to be sociable. So once you've got the staff kind of back on board again and they start coming in, then we went into this phase where it was like, okay, how are we going to reopen? And obviously we've talked about the updates from Chris, and I'm so glad I'm on the JEG committee now, because that's been so useful to be there and be part of those conversations and hear what other schools are doing, and then obviously share that with the other heads in Smethwick. And it's been really reassuring as well, because I think one of the things, I never felt at any stage, I've got to do this, I've got to have this many children, it always felt like, what can I manage? What space have I got? What rooms have I got? And what staff have I got to staff those spaces? And so then you've got the jigsaw situation. So I'm like, okay, right, let's look at my staff. Let's work out who am I really vulnerable, they can't come into school, but I can give them a role. Who are the staff who can be in school, and then who are the ones in between? So we kind of came up with it's a bit of a jigsaw, I guess. And and I think a lot of schools are doing something similar. So I've got my teachers who are in school and my teaching assistants who run the bubbles, and they each have a bubble. I've got a team then who come in and do playground duties. So they're the ones who are, I don't know what we call them anymore, reasonably vulnerable, I guess. So they're not coming into the building. They're either shielding a loved one or need to be careful themselves. So they only do a duty outside and stay outside. The children don't come near them, but they're basically give all the bubble staff a break at lunchtime and during the day, so that you know, they get a break basically. And again, that works really well, because you've got these staff who are shielding, but and they will then come into the playground. It's outdoor. They know on a wet play, we've had loads of wet play times, haven't we? It's typical. They can't come in on a wet play. They don't come into the building. They literally come in, do their duty, go home. They don't even get a cup of tea, toilet or anything. They literally stay away, but they are outside where, you know, we're risk assessing that that's safe. And then I've got another team who are either much more vulnerable or got childcare issues or all those other things that prevent them coming in, who run an online lessons now. So we're doing like daily live lessons with children, and then that complements any homework they've got. And I've still got a little pastoral team who go out and do food parcels, homework deliveries, and just general safe and well checks. And when we get notifications of domestic violence or any of those things, which, as Leslie said, they come in thick and fast, then I've got a sort of team who can go out and find out what's been going on there. So, or any, you know, if a teacher says, oh, I've been trying to do a phone call and I haven't got through to somebody, then we'll go and do a knock-on home visit just to see how they are and see what's going on. So yeah, it's kind of been a bit of a jigsaw, and it feels like in this sort of, I'm not going to say final phase, because it just keeps moving, doesn't it? But in the current phase, it feels like we are finding a bit of a normal and finding what the normal in this situation looks and feels like, and then thinking about what could that look like when we're looking at classes of 30 in September. And I know obviously we'll be talking about that as a group of heads over the next few weeks to come for that.
Sorry to interrupt. It will be a different normal. It won't be the same as it was.
Yeah.
So brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Lynn. Thank you very much. It was you know, really great to hear directly from someone who's been on the front line. Who's been actually dealing with the
not quite. I'm not an NHS worker. They're the front line here, aren't they?
No, of course. the way you've managed you know, our kids in this crisis, and especially if you look at if you wouldn't have managed to have the kids of the care workers, they wouldn't have been able to perform their jobs. So you've done a fantastic in your role. So we really appreciate that, and it is really good to hear directly from you. So I appreciate your time and you coming to the board, and thank you, Chris and Leslie, for your presentations as well. I'm just mindful of time because I promised members I won't drag it too long, because it's just the first virtual meeting we're having. So I don't want to put them off so that they don't turn up on the next one. So, okay.
I'm going to go now then, okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was
Lovely.
Good to have you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. I've got few members for questions. The first one is Liam Price, please. Liam?
It's all right, Chair. You can get my name wrong. It's okay.
Sorry. My apologies.
I've been called a lot worse. Don't worry. I think yes. I echo your comments, Chair, completely about the usefulness and the informative nature of the presentations we've just heard. It's very, very welcome to have them. And it's good to be back having meetings as well. I've just got a couple of questions for Chris and for Leslie. The first one, Leslie, is you mentioned that you've been having the daily sit-rep meetings, which is encouraging. I just wanted to get a feel as to how the Children's Trust have engaged with those and if they attended those regularly with you. The next question is, you mentioned also, Leslie, you've been talking to young people and their families still throughout lockdown. What have they been saying to you specifically about the challenges they're facing and how have you addressed those? And then for Chris, you mentioned that schools are now procuring their own PPE after the council initially gave them a bit of a starter in it. Has that affected their budgets at all in an adverse way? And if so, how are we mitigating that? I know at the start of the crisis, the price of PPE inflated dramatically, and that was felt particularly in care homes. We're spending an enormous amount of money on PPE. I know that price has come down a little bit now, but I just wondered if the provision has been set out in schools' budgets, it's not going to affect other services later on. And also, it's been widely mooted and expected that the government are going to change the safe social distancing rule from 2 metres possibly to 1 metre, maybe even tomorrow. What conversations have been had in schools, with schools in anticipation of that change taking place? Because I assume we'll then be able to increase capacity somewhat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chris, would you like to take on Leslie?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first, Leslie.
Okay. First of all, Councillor Priest, yes, the Children's Trust have been at the sit-rep almost every day. I think Frances might have missed 2 of the daily sit-rep meetings, but she's been at all of the meetings. She's been able to contribute, but also take things back to the Trust to help their planning as well. And I know that the Trust have found it very, very helpful. The latest conversation is the sort of risk assessment planning, the reset and recovery planning that we're using to try and get services back into our own buildings. And again, the Trust have taken out the same template that we're using to apply that to their work as well. What are young people and families saying? So we've had lots of really lovely feedback from families, particularly where we've provided food, medicines, toys, games, resource packs, all of those sorts of things. Lots of lovely feedback. But you know, families have been worried about getting children back to school and what's it going to be like when children get back to school. Lots of families have actually enjoyed extra family time, particularly families that might be furloughed. But lots of families have really struggled with, you know, no money, and the difference that the food packs have made has been really considerable for some families. One of the things I didn't mention actually in the presentation is that a large number of our families as well have been supported through evening meals. So the Albion Foundation, originally their chefs were cooking evening meals, and they were being delivered to about 400 families. So that's been fantastic. Now, since their chefs were furloughed, they've been still supporting those families, but through delivering food. So families have been really, really grateful for the food. Young people have been really anxious about their exams, about schoolwork that they've missed, about missing their friends, about whether they'll be able to catch up, whether they can retake a year, whether they can go back to school, resit their exams, what will happen next, about the grading for exams. Younger children have been worried about their friends. And we've also heard quite a lot of young people, older young people, talking about the potential for self-harm. And actually, what have we done about any of these things? So we've been making sure that we're communicating back through schools and the college, Sandwell College. We've been in constant contact with them as well to get communication out to pupils and students, but also out to families. We've sent various parents' newsletters. We've been providing family fact sheets, and through our young people's forums, we've been sending information back. But there's been some practical stuff as well. So in terms of self-harm, in conversation with the CCG, they've agreed to put more resource into COOF, which is the online young people's counselling service for emotional health and wellbeing. And from next week, there'll be more time available for that phone line to be available 24/7 for Sandwell children. Chris, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a really good question about PPE, because that's what was exercised in schools quite a bit. I think at the initial outset, the issue was around sanitizer more than anything else. That was the key for schools. What we gave them in our startup packs so they could prepare for a wider opening was shields, face shields, masks, gloves and gowns, so they had enough of those to deal with it. The government guidance is quite clear for schools in that they don't actually have to use PPE unless there's a specific situation that requires them to. So unless a child is ill or there are issues around a child's needs or behaviours that require them to wear PPE, so they won't go through lots and lots unless they're operating in a special school. So we doubled up the packs that we were sending to special schools as a result. Now schools have contacted us since then if they're getting short of PPE or finding it difficult to access it, and equally our union colleagues have sent out a really long list of suppliers nationally and given those to the schools as well. Now since then we've not had any requests from schools to for PPE additionally, and they're, because they've got such a long list to choose from, they are actually doing quite well in purchasing it at a reasonable cost. I'm not saying it's as cheap as it was, because it certainly hasn't, and someone's out there making a profit, but clearly they're able to access it at a price they feel is reasonable. And during these last few months, schools actually have made some savings in terms of not having the full buildings open, so some of their extra costs on PPE would have been set off against some of their savings they've made over the last few weeks. In terms of social distancing, that's a really good question. The guidance obviously about social distancing is generally aimed at adults more than children, because if anyone ever tried to keep nursery and reception class apart, it's absolutely impossible. They will naturally go together and play together, and they would being 2 meters apart is just something they can't do. So what we think the 1 meter distancing will do is affect the way in which staff can operate with the children, particularly those who are not inside a bubble with the children, so they can have a little bit more closer contact with those young people. Will it increase the amount of children we can have in? Well, that will depend on the school's measurements in terms of what head teachers can calculate as safe space. Now, if they're going to bring this in, I think it's July the 4th, isn't it, Leslie? They're thinking about bringing this in. That actually means there's only 2 weeks of the school term. So the question will be whether the school will make big changes for the last 2 weeks or not. But that's a question we'll pick up with the joint executive group this Thursday, so that schools have a position ready for when that announcement comes. But it's certainly something they'll be thinking about. They all actually want to open. They feel the schools are empty without the children in there. They want to get them back in. So anything that helps them do that and they feel safe, that's good. That's what they want to do.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's very reassuring.
Thank you, Chair.
To hear that. Thank you. There are no current issues with PPE and other issues. We discussed this quite a lot when we were preparing for the phased opening. But thank you very much for that update. I've got all the members who want to ask questions in sequence, so I'll invite you in the sequence you raised your hand. I've got Elaine and then Councillor Anne Shackleton. So Elaine, do you want to ask your question first?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions, Chris and Leslie. Leslie, you mentioned in the first slide that there was detached youth worker. What's the one in every town? That's the question, because obviously we wasn't aware of that, so that would be a good question to ask it. Chris, the next question is to you. Are we still treating key workers? Are that still priority? Taking the kids to school? And also, did you say there was 1,586 laptops that had been delivered? And you know, I'm just curious as to, is there many more to be delivered? I don't know whether I caught you right on that one. I think that was just a couple of questions I needed to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie, would you like to?
Pick up the youth work. Yeah, detached youth work. Every town, and where there isn't a park, there's been street activity taking place, and also youth workers have been responded to. You know, we've had a handful of really quite serious incidents, and when those serious incidents have happened, our youth workers have been specifically working in those areas as well. They send me daily reports of everything that they've seen and found in every place, and we've been able to respond to some of those things within the council where we can as well.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Key workers. Yeah, the critical worker list still remains the same, and those children of those parents should be in school. Okay, so if they've got an opportunity to go in and the space, they can come in. So our priority is vulnerable children first, critical worker children second, then reception year 1, year 6. Okay, so that's the order schools take them independent on space. The other one is around laptops. Yes, it was 1,586 that have been delivered so far. They've all arrived. We're expecting 200 more to come in for our year 10 disadvantaged pupils, and those will come in at the end of June, and we'll make sure those go out as soon as we have them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah,
yes,
can I
Elaine.
just come back to Leslie?
Yes, very quickly.
Leslie, just mentioning about the detached youth worker. I think it would have been nice for members to have been known about the detached youth workers, because I wasn't aware, and it's a shame because there was a few issues. So if I'd have known there was detached youth workers out there, I could have found out. So it's just a shame it didn't come down the chain. Thanks.
Yeah.
Leslie.
No, thank you for that feedback, and you know that they're still doing their work every day. So you know, if you come across anything, send it to me, and I will make sure that you know our teams can respond. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Anne Shackleton, please.
Two questions, one for Leslie and one for Chris. Leslie, you really expanded on vulnerability. At the moment, the nation sees vulnerability as children who are eligible for free school meals. And of course, that's not something that we would totally agree with, but you know why I'm saying that. You gave some wonderful examples of vulnerable children, even to the window situation. However, I feel that we need to expand more on this, because I suppose basically we need to know what the main areas in Sandwell are of vulnerability. Which categories do our children fall into? Because I've always got a big thing about the intergenerational aspect of vulnerability and ACEs, for example, you know, things like that, but I won't go on. To Chris, I want to say that I don't know how many people on the panel would agree with me, but this situation seems to have highlighted more than anything else the inequalities that we suffer in education. Real inequality. I mean, I could give examples. Down the road in a Sandwell school, only 6 children turned up for lessons last Monday or the Monday before, out of 30 children. I live by Hales Owen, school in Hales Owen, 26 children turned up in year 6. I am not convinced about reception in year 1, returning to school. What happened to year 2, you know, the end of a key stage. Also, some children are getting, and I can speak for a family member, he's getting 3 to 4 hours work each day online. And we know of other children who aren't getting anything, probably the children that need it most. So I think, would you agree, it really has highlighted the inequalities for our children in education? Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. I'll come in on that then. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to point out inequalities in this response. There's an equality in the way in which we can provide support across different areas of the country. But equally, there's questions around the messages that parents have received. It's safe to do this, it's not safe to do that. I think a lot of parents have been confused by the messages they've received and haven't felt fully safe whether or not it's good to return their children to school. Equally, when you talk about which classes are prioritised by the government, if they'd asked schools would have given you a completely different age ranges that they felt were the important ones to come back in. I think everyone would have said year 10, everyone would have said year 12, but actually the primary schools would have said year 5 if they'd have been asked. So there is something around that would have been really good to get their opinion on. Equally, there's some schools who went into this well prepared in terms of having the ability to do online learning quite quickly and move to that quite quickly. Others have had to develop this as it's gone through the last few months. So I think there has been a slower start for some schools doing that. I mean, the good side of this is that once we get out of this situation, we will have schools that are fairly well developed IT-wise that have been pushed into a position where they've had to change the way in which they operate. So I think there is a plus side for it as well. Equally, what has happened here is that our schools and academies have come a lot closer together to find solutions that work across the board, and other schools have been supporting schools in a way that they haven't previously. So that's been good to see as well as that develops. But clearly, in a borough like Sandwell, we know that the disadvantage gap is bigger than in other areas. So we're always starting from a position of catch up. So for us, we want to make sure schools can start getting young people back in safely, you know, as soon as we can now, and they're preparing for it obviously from September, but there will be obviously a widening that will be announced tomorrow that might give us an opportunity to restart some other areas and some other classes, and we'll work with schools to see what that means.
In terms of your other questions, Councillor Shackleton, you're absolutely right about vulnerability, and we take a much broader view of vulnerability than free school meals, and this was quite an interesting one actually. When we first started having the daily meetings with the DFE, for the first few weeks, our data looked completely out of kilter with the national data and even with some of the regional data. And then we realised it's because our group of vulnerable children was a much bigger group that we were thinking about than that narrow group. And then we shared that with the DFE and actually said to them, you need to be thinking about a wider group as well. In April this year, the Children's Commissioner published the Child Vulnerability Index, and you can search it right the way through to each local authority. And I've got our data, and if that's something that Scrutiny members would like me to circulate to have a look at maybe a future meeting, or just for general interest, I'm really happy to share that. But you know, it includes all of those other factors like living in houses of multiple occupation and a whole range of things, even down to, you know, not having IT. And the whole thing about the government saying they will provide laptops, you know, there was a massive gap there to start with, because there was an assumption that every household has access to the internet, and so they've had to provide, you know, 4G dongles and things like that. So no, we look much more widely. And just picking up on the ACES work, so I chair that ACES work in Sandwell, and actually we had started to deliver what we call trusted adult training. We want all adults in every agency, you know, all professionals in Sandwell to become trusted adults, people that young people can talk to and can trust, and that's based on trauma-informed practice. We've been working with the globally known Dr. Karen Treisman on this work, and in fact she was going to come to Sandwell. She still might come at some point in the future, but she can't come physically at the moment. But we're going to have a webinar for Sandwell with her in a couple of months' time. But we really want to deliver that trauma-informed practice to everyone in Sandwell. And the new Artemis module, the ACES module, we want everyone to do that basic ACES awareness. You know, if anyone's on the call that hasn't done it yet, please do that very basic ACES awareness. It's a very good Artemis module.
Thank you very much, Leslie and Chris. Yes, I would request all the members, if you haven't taken up that training on Artemis, please do. It's a really very good basic information about ACE and other aspects of coronavirus pandemic. So thank you very much for that, Leslie. The next question is from Zahir Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is a bit of elaboration on some of the questions that the members have asked. So Leslie, you mentioned about the 700 or so vulnerable people, children in the borough. So what I wanted to know is that, is there a plan and monitoring in place for all these children? So is there a robust kind of oversight on this from yourself? And Chris, just elaborate a little bit more on the digital inclusion side of things. So in terms of online learning, I'm thinking about the children that obviously don't have access to learning now, and obviously it's going to have a detrimental effect on their learning. Are you confident that now across the borough that all children are engaged in some kind of learning? And lastly, you said that the take-up is around 60% in terms of classroom places. So that other 40%, what is the plan with those children, and how are they accessing learning now? Thank you.
Okay, right, sorry. Okay, first of all, yes, digital inclusion, we think that's obviously really important there. Could I hand on heart say that every child, you know, will have access once all the laptops are handed out? Well, no, because the number of laptops that we are receiving doesn't match the number of children we have in our total list. So what we've had to do is make sure we've handed them out where there's siblings in the family, so that at least there'll be one machine in the family to spread things out. I mean, it's not ideal. What would we have liked? Double the amount. That would help solve it, but that only affects a certain group of children because we've identified them as vulnerable children. There's a whole group of struggling families who are sitting just above this, who are kind of below the radar a lot of the time, and a lot of those young people will have access to maybe very old technology or only have a phone to operate from. And actually, when you're talking about 60,000 pupils in the borough, it's not possible for me or anyone in the council to know exactly who's got access to what machines. What we do though is try and ask the schools to find out what is the gap in terms of who can or can't access things, and see if they can assist as well, because they can use pupil premium money and pupil premium plus money if they are looked after. So what we're trying to do is try and fill as many holes as possible to give the access. Equally, schools will have loan machines and operate machines in site that young people can access. Does it cover everybody? I couldn't hand on heart say yes to that, but it's a lot better than it was. And we know that the future will be for young people who are doing catch-up to get involved in one-to-one discussions online with tutors. So those young people will actually have to have access either in school or at home to do that. In terms of the uptake, 60% of our year 10s are taking up the spaces they've been offered. The 40% who haven't are still being sent work and work in terms of work packs or online learning, depending on how the school's operating at the moment. Whether they are completing that satisfactorily is a matter the schools would know the ins and outs of. I mean, they clearly have a list of pupils they will be very concerned about, and a list of pupils who they'll have had lots of contact with during this period. So we'll be picking that up with the schools as we support them going forward. But we know there will be a number of young people who will have enjoyed a 4 or 5 month holiday, and a number of young people who will have spent the 4 or 5 months, working away in their bedrooms doing things, and that's the gap that we're going to have to try and deal with over time. Okay, Leslie.
In terms of the vulnerable children, so the 700, they're just the shielded children. So these are children, with life-limiting illnesses or who are very, very poorly and need to shield. So, just like adults, not to go outside for 12 weeks, in that initial period. But the vulnerable children's group is much, much broader than that. It's probably about 6,000 children. So the vulnerable children's group, after each meeting or during each meeting, records a set of actions that it's going to take, and that they're sent to me and to Chris, so that I can have some daily oversight of what's happening in that group, and then I can go back to that group and ask for feedback about various things that have happened. I have audited some children's files, some case files, to make sure that action has been taken and things have been followed up. So I think we've got pretty good oversight. I think, my biggest concern is what can't we see. So the children who are in that group are children that we know about, or that we've become aware of. There will clearly be, during this period of time, some hidden harm that we can't currently see, and that's what we need to be preparing ourselves, I think, as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Leslie and Chris. Just being mindful of the time, I've got 4 more questions. So can I request members to be very precise and stay on the point, please. Next question from Kerry Carmichael, please.
Yes, thank you. My question's to Chris, really. It's regarding the terms of these laptops. I've had one parent contact me who's refused to have the laptop because she said when she read the terms and conditions, if there was any damage to it, then she was going to have to pay in full for the laptop, and she obviously couldn't afford that. I was just wondering if that was the case.
What we've actually asked schools to do is to take on the responsibility for the laptops once they're handed over, and to support the children, young people as they use them. I mean, clearly, when you get something as valuable as a laptop, you want young people to look after them and make the most of them. But we have to have a legal agreement in place for them to accept them. I mean, if there are specific issues, then if they contact us, we will try and help resolve them. I think that's probably the best way in a one-to-one situation. But really, we want to make sure that the laptops are managed through the schools in most cases.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next is Richard McVitie.
Thank you very much. I just wondered whether the council's PPE items are the same calculations as the government. I hope they're not. So when we issue a school with 50 tissues, it's not 50 items, it's a box of tissues. And I just wanted to make sure that our calculations in Sandwell actually meet the needs of our schools, rather than ticking a box for a pair of gloves is 2 items, not a pair of gloves. And so that's just probably a council question. And also, with regards to the capacity for teachers, do we have like a coronaphobia amongst staff about returning to work, and is there a concern within the team that schools won't be able to meet the needs of people returning back to school in September?
Okay, I can confirm the PPE is of high quality and it is counted correctly. Okay, I think it's a really good question. I actually nearly said it as I responded on the last one, so I'm glad you brought it up. And sorry, what was the other one? It was
teachers' concerns about coming back to school, and are we
Okay.
finding that teachers are reluctant to go back into the classroom?
Teachers actually want to come back into the classroom. The problem is the risk assessments they have to go through. When some are shielding or living with people who are particularly vulnerable, means that they have to operate in a certain way. So sometimes, even though a teacher wants to go back in the classroom, the head teacher has to say, you can't. You can do this activity off-site or this activity on-site, but you can't have contact with children. So they're not so much phobic as being allowed to be able to do what they can and can't do. So when the schools talk about staffing issues, it's basically sort of saying there's an issue with the number of staff who are available to do face-to-face teaching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have Councillor Kay Miller next, please. Kay.
Yes, I'm coming. Just give me a minute. Hello. Mine is more an observation, really. And what struck me is the crucial role of kind of food in schools and distribution of food to families. How crucial that has been. Listening to, I didn't catch the head teacher's name. I apologise for that. But is that a role that schools will keep on going, do you think? Or do you think it just seemed pivotal to me, and I don't know what you think about that. So it's just open to either Leslie or Chris, whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we've probably both got something to say, actually, but it's so important, whether we're in the coronavirus lockdown or not. You know, if a child's hungry, it can't learn. It's as basic as that, and that's why so many of our schools provide breakfast. But I think that you know, we're trying to find a way to keep this going. There'll be free school meals for those that currently receive free school meals, you know, during the summer. But this has been much wider, the food distribution. So we're just having conversations actually with local food hubs now about what we can do to keep things going. And I think it will be an ongoing conversation with schools about how we might be able to, in partnership between the council, the voluntary sector food hubs and schools, how we might keep something going in the future. It's been really vital, really vital. Do you think the same, Chris?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the pressure that everyone put on the government to ensure that the voucher system continued over the summer holidays is really telling, because I think that what's happened with a number of people losing a significant proportion of their wages is that we've had an increase in children on free school meals. And that has gone up quite significantly since the start of March. And these are the children we know about from a distance from their homes, and requesting that parents fill in the right form to get access to this. But the 6 weeks of having food vouchers will be incredibly helpful. Equally, we've been talking about how the food hub in Sandwell that we've put together as a council has been effective. When you add in how many parcels of food and packages schools have done on top of that, it effectively doubles everything the council has done on top of that. And so I must pay tribute to the schools, in fact, for pulling this together, because they've actually mobilised their whole community to do this. So like the school community, the parent community, and then they've acted as a distribution hub, as well as informing us about young people who need food from the Albion Foundation or from our food hub as well. So that they've really acted as the conduit of all of these things. And we know that's something that schools have always been good at identifying, but this has demonstrated how well they can work together. What I'd also like to say before we finish on the subject is that what this has also demonstrated is the need for a local authority, because it's been the local authority that has been the one that's been reactive to this and pulling everyone together, and particularly academy groups who, you know, would have been operating separately and differently to the authority as well. They've all worked together, they've shared their resources, they've been superb in making sure that we know what they're doing and they know what we're doing and acting upon it. I cannot thank the head teachers and academy principals any more than I have done. Honestly, they've been brilliant, they have been superb, and they keep in contact every single day telling us what they're doing. So I'd just like to say that at the end, but having a council that's invested in a local authority and maintain services for the last 10 years has been the reason why we've been able to respond so quickly to a lot of the issues that have arisen during the last 4 months. So thanks to you for making that happen.
Thank you very much. Just to add to that, I think schools been substantial in providing this information about who are the most vulnerable in terms of the need for food. And Leslie mentioned about the Albion Foundation earlier. So that's been a very popular project, and the council is trying to roll it on, because as we all know, this is not something that's going to last for a month or two. This is something that we may have to, carry on for another 6 months or maybe a year. So yes, and just to update you regarding that chef which will be delivering hot food very popularly, he's back part-time, so he's quite in demand. So we need more voluntary organizations to join the platform and help and support councils in dealing with issues like this. So brilliant. And next we got Councillor Jenny Chidley.
Right, can you see me? I'd just like to say firstly, thank you very much, Leslie and Chris and everybody that's been involved. I know it sounds like everybody's been under immense pressure, considering there's been 170 changes as well. So I take my hat off to everybody that's been involved in this. Yeah, just wanted to say I have taken the ACES course, very informative. So all you councillors out there, very good. I urge you to do that. Brilliant. Also, I'm concerned about the PPE really. I have been in touch with Public Health England regarding the masks. Now that they don't actually protect your eyes, so I've advised with the visors. So I know you mentioned the teachers having the masks. Will they be having visors as well? That's just my question really. Thank you.
Okay, yes, visors were put in the packs as well. But obviously the visors can be reused and cleaned and put out again. So yeah, I think there was a couple of full screen visors for the situations that required the use.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, and also, I went to church on Sunday, the first time we've been allowed to go for a quiet meeting, and they had that the no-touch thermometer. Have the schools been provided with those as well?
Okay, schools haven't been provided with those. Sorry, Leslie, your microphone stopped working, Leslie.
I can put it on. So our Director of Public Health has been really clear with us that the thermometers don't really do anything in terms of helping, except perhaps give some confidence. But actually, it is not an indicator really of very much at all. We haven't provided thermometers to our schools.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought they'd be able to tell if you got a temperature or not.
Yeah, they do, and children have temperatures for all sorts of reasons. So I think in terms of it as an indicator of whether or not a child has symptoms of coronavirus, it would be one of the things to look out for. But as I say, our Director of Public Health has been very, very clear that this is not really of very much use at all, other than maybe to make adults feel a bit more confident.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Okay, finally, it's my turn now. So I'll try to keep it very brief. First question to Leslie. In terms of wider impact of COVID-19, I understand that we have an inspection due in September from Ofsted for our Sandwell Children's Trust. So what sort of impact do you think COVID could have in our inspection outcomes?
So we won't be inspected in September. No. So Ofsted have cancelled all inspections I don't imagine they will start inspecting properly until the next calendar year. We expect that they'll probably do a couple of visits maybe in the autumn to us. In terms of impact, the impact of COVID, I mean, the interesting thing is in the children's social care space, quite a lot of the performance has improved over this period of time, continued to improve. Staff sickness hasn't been poor at all. And I do think that there's that interesting thing about work-life balance that maybe has actually given us something to think about in terms of how those staff do their work in the future. So I think the impact might be that, you know, the requirement in terms of the regulatory duty to see children face to face is something we've not been able to do. But that will be no different for Sandwell than all of the other local authorities in the rest of the country. So I think that sorry, I've got a message. Sorry. So I think that, you know, when we are inspected, our trajectory is still moving in the right direction, and I would hope it would be positive. It's frustrating that it's going to be a long way off, because I think everyone was sort of ready for it. We just have to keep improving and make sure it's good when it comes.
Absolutely. That's very reassuring. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, my very small question for Chris before we move on. Chris, you mentioned about, you know, widening attainment gap and, you know, anticipation about increased pupil anxiety. So have we got any measures in take, or have we got a plan how we're going to deal with these issues?
Yeah, I think the widening attainment gap, we know that the plan has been released by the government over the weekend in terms of headlines around catch-up plans for schools. So that's £650 million direct to schools across the country and £350 million towards tutoring projects, mentoring projects. Effectively, that works out about £80 per child. So schools can work on factoring in what their catch-up plans are going to look like, and schools can spend that over the next 18 months. We haven't got the details of all of that yet. It's one of those announcements that we're waiting for the nitty-gritties and how schools can access the money. We also know that schools will have to put in towards those fundings to get some out, so they'll have to invest a little bit themselves to do that. So schools, again, interested, want to do it, but clearly need the money to get going on that. We will support schools to take whatever measures they need to actually increase the rates of performance for young people and their catch-up. In terms of levels of anxiety, schools are very aware of that, and what we've asked them to do is not to launch straight into the normal curriculum when young people return, but actually to work with them initially to make sure that they feel safe and secure and ready to learn, and all their social skills are focused on initially, so that they can get back into a learning frame of mind. That's really important for our young people. We have got specialists who are being brought in from our educational psychology team who will support children and young people who are struggling with that. And equally, we've made schools very aware of all the variety of different voluntary services that are available that young people can get advice and guidance from as well. We've been doing that throughout this period as well, so that young people can access them straight away. So we are expecting to see, as Leslie was talking about right at the start, a surge in requests for support and advice. And we're also going to see a surge in training needs for staff as well, to make sure that they are prepared and ready. What we're going to ask schools to do is make sure that when there is a full restart in September, on their training day, they focus on, you know, how to spot when young people are struggling in particular, make sure they've got routines set up, how they can make sure that young people are supported immediately in the classroom and also then at home again at the end of the day. So there's a lot for us to think about here, but we have got support packages in place through the council, and schools, of course, are focusing on that more than anything at this very moment.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think when we have our next meeting, a lot of things which we can pick up as our looking into homeschooling. So we'll be able to pick up a lot of things related to this anyway. Thank you very much, Chris and Leslie. That concludes the question and answer session. So thank you very much for updating the board regarding the current situation of schools and children's services. So we move on to the next item, which is Youth Facilities Scrutiny Review Report. I chaired the working group, so I'm happy to introduce, and then I'll invite James, Deb, and Leslie to take over. Just brief introduction. Youth work is not about giving our young people something to do. It's not even a space or a facility where young people gather. It's a lot more than that. There is a strong evidence that youth services have a vital role to play in tackling crime, gang culture, and loneliness. We're talking about our next generations, our future. So it is something of great significance, and we need to take this seriously and get it right. The last review we had was a decade ago, and in the last 10 years, we've had austerity, which has devastating effects on our frontline services. And we all know that these effects are not just immediate ones, but the generations to come will have to face the consequences. Now we are living through the most unprecedented times, and there are certain things beyond our control. But what we can always do is learn and adapt. This piece of work gives you a fresh view about how we need to adapt and change to deliver the best possible outcome. This report is not comprehensive, but it is an indication to how we may need to change our approach and perception about the services we deliver. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the working group for their contribution, and officers, James, Alex, and not to miss Deborah Breeden for her analytical precision to capture every detail from the feedback and discussions. I would like to thank Leslie for her guidance throughout the project and her timely feedback and support.